Okay, we are now live, and hello everyone. My name is William Plotnick, and I'm the executive director of Cinematographer. We're a New York City and Sao Paulo-based nonprofit organization dedicated to exhibiting, distributing, and digitizing repertoire Brazilian cinema. I want to thank you for tuning in to tonight's very special event with the title Filming Mémoria do Cangaço, Cinematographer Affonso Beato in conversation about his first film. And soon we will learn actually that Mémoria do Cangaço is not his first film, but let's stick with that title for the time being, and we'll hear from him shortly about what actually was his first film and maybe why there is that misconception. For anyone joining us in the audience for this event, I encourage you to send questions in the chat box at any time, and we will do our best to address them towards the end of the discussion. Before we begin, I want to say some thank yous. I want to begin by recognizing everyone who made this live event possible. Tonight's event has two incredible organizational sponsors. The first is ABC Cursos de Cinema. And ABC Cursos de Cinema, the educational arm of the ABC Brazilian Association of Cinematography, was idealized as a center of excellence and innovation. Aware of its mission, it goes far beyond offering courses and is active in actions of social inclusion. The cinema courses in higher education institutions in Brazil lack adequate technical education because by law, they cannot hire experienced professionals without a postgraduate diploma. ABC Cursos de Cinema fills this gap, offering its students a unique opportunity to produce film projects under the guidance of a faculty of ABC associates and experienced professionals, all of whom are recognized in the Brazilian audiovisual market. Indeed, our guest speaker tonight, Affonso Beato, is currently an active member of ABC Cursos de Cinema as the teaching director of the organization. And for those interested in learning more about ABC Cursos de Cinema, you can go to abccursos.org.br. And thank you again to ABC Cursos de Cinema for helping to sponsor the event. The second sponsor of tonight's event is Canal Tomás Farkas. The Tomás Farkas channel was created with the main objective of diffusing the cinematographic production of the Hungarian living in Brazil, Tomás Farkas. Besides being an important photographer in the consolidation of the modern tradition of Brazilian photography, Tomás Farkas also developed a solid cinematographic production. These films marked the production of Brazilian documentary cinema and were the beginning of a transformation that influenced many directors. Collected on the Canal Tomás Farkas website are 37 short and medium-length films that Tomás worked on as a producer, director of photography, and director. Cinematography is a proud partner of Canal Tomás Farkas as we currently work to translate all of the producers' films into English and make them more accessible globally. I want to give a very special thanks to Guilherme Farkas, the grandson of Tomás, who has been a very kind collaborator throughout our effort to translate and call more attention to these films. And last but certainly not least, I want to both thank and introduce our very special guest tonight, one of the world's most important living cinematographers, the legendary Affonso Beato. For fans of American and Brazilian cinema, Beato perhaps needs no introduction, but I'll do my best to give him one. Affonso Beato was born on July 13th, 1941, in Rio de Janeiro. In the early 1960s, he studied at the National School of Fine Arts and also at the Cinematographer Affonso, where he met several important names in Brazilian cinema, such as Caca Diegues and David Neves. His first lessons in cinematography were by Argentinian photographer Ricardo Aranovich, who's also behind incredible productions of Brazilian cinema. In the early part of his career, Beato was extremely active, shooting now classic Brazilian short films, including O Cerco, the 1965 film directed by Arnaldo Jabor, Heitor dos Prazeres, 1965 film directed by Antônio Fontoura, O Povo do Velho Pedro, the 1965 film directed by Sérgio Muniz, Auto de Vitória, the 1966 film directed by Geraldo Sano, and Mémoria do Cangaço, the 1964 film by Paulo Soares, which is the film that we will be focusing on tonight. As a cinematographer on short documentary films, Beato would have an incredible collaboration with Tomás Farkas, the producer, working on numerous works produced by the Hungarian, including Jornal do Sotau, Os Imaginários, Viva Cariri, A Cantoria, A Riva Bruxa, A Morte do Boi, A Mal do Homem, Frei Damião, Trombeta dos Aflitos, Martelo dos Hereges, O Engênio, Jaramataia, and Pedro Cícero. Surely this is one of the most incredible collaborative runs by a producer and cinematographer in the history of Brazilian cinema. And we're really excited to be focusing on the very first of their fruitful collaborations. Continuing on, Beato's first feature is Cara a Cara, the 1967 film by Julio Bressani, for which he received the Best Photography Award at the Brasilia Film Festival. Beato would shoot two more classic features of Brazilian cinema, O Bravo Guerreiro by Gustavo Dal and Copacabana Me Engana by Antonio Fontoura, before working on the color photography of Antonio das Mortes, 1969 film by Glauber Rocha, for which he received major international recognition. From then on, he began an incredible career as one of the most recognized directors of photography of his generation. He has worked on nationally renowned productions in Brazil, such as 5 Days, 5 Nights, Orpheus, and God is Brazilian, as well as renowned foreign films such as All About My Mother, Love in the Time of Cholera, and The Queen. Throughout his entire career in the US, I want to note that Beato continued to work on many Brazilian films, constantly coming back here to strengthen the productions of his home country with his cinematography. Finally, Affonso Beato belongs to the ASC, American Society of Cinematographers, ABC, Brazilian Association of Cinematography, and AMPAS, Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. And for the past 11 years, he has been working, or perhaps longer than 11, he has been working as an adjunct professor of cinematography at the graduate and undergraduate film department Art Center. In 2018, he was elected one of the most important film instructors in the United States by Variety magazine. And that wraps my lengthy introduction. Once again, Affonso, thank you so much for being here tonight to talk with us about Mémoria do Cangaço.
Thank you to have me. Great introduction. Thank you so much. Your research, I mean, you know what you're talking about.
Yes. And before we get started, let me just quickly give an introduction to the film in case anyone's tuning in now or in the future and maybe has yet to give it a watch. Paulo Gil Soares' documentary, Mémoria do Cangaço, is one of the most important documentary films about the Cangaço ever made. Paulo Gil Soares had just finished working as an assistant director, production designer, and dialogue writer on Glauber Rocha's Black God, White Devil, when he went on to create this work, which would be the first film of the famous Caravan Farkas. For those who are not familiar with the term, Cangaço was a phenomenon of Northeast Brazil in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The Northeast is known for its dryness and hard way of life, and in a form of social banditry against the government, many men and women decided to become bandits, roaming the backlands, seeking money, food, and revenge. Mémoria do Cangaço attempts to discuss the origins and aftermath of the Cangaço. The film interviews survivors of the Cangaceiro. It interviews a professor at the University of Bahia, Estácio de Lima. It interviews Coronel José Rufino of the Bahia Military Police, who was responsible for the persecution and death of more than 30 Cangaceiros and countless other famous Cangaceiros who were still alive during this period. According to Paulo Gil Soares, the film began in an informal meeting with Tomás Farkas in a bar in Copacabana in '64. He says, in an Atlantic Avenue in Rio, still without the reforms that took away the sea and widened the sidewalk, and cramped by the climate of the dictatorship, Tomás Farkas approved the script of my first personal film, which ended up starting my life as a filmmaker and as a carioca, opening the path for me to professionalism. The film ended up winning the only Golden Seagull at the 1965 International Film Festival. Paulo Gil also remembers that in 1969, Farkas started producing cultural documentaries again, and he says, we went to the Northeast to make a fantastic cycle of films that portrayed the culture of the region. And many of those films I just listed, and of course, many of those films you yourself, Affonso, worked intimately on. Paulo Gil's film, as well as the others produced by Farkas, proposed to rethink Brazil, overcoming boundaries between popular and old art, between the archaic and the modern, between the coast and the backlands, and between academic and popular knowledge. And I want to end my introduction by quoting my friend Gustavo Menezes, and he writes, even though it was not the first documentary about Cangaço, Mémoria do Cangaço was probably the first film that took an actively critical stance when looking at that topic. And for all of that, it is obligatory in Cangaço studies as well as Brazilian cinema. And with that, I end my introduction. And with that, I want to ask you, Affonso, my first question. And it goes as follows. I want to start by asking you how, in fact, you got into cinematography in Brazil in the 60s, and how those early experiences led to you being hired to become the cinematographer of Mémoria do Cangaço. I'm particularly interested in hearing about the course you took with Ricardo Aranovich and what your first experiences ever were behind the camera there in Rio before this film.
Okay, let's start by then. Okay, so this is Rio de Janeiro, maybe 1958. I was leaving high school, getting into fine arts, Belas Artes in Rio. And by what I knew about my vocation, I was very interested in photography. And I was a horrible painter, start a school of fine arts. But I had the privilege to meet a great modern art professor, Aloysio Carvão, in the Museum of Modern Art of Rio, where is the Cinemateca of Brazil, the Modern Arts in Rio, Cinemateca do Brasil. And then from there, I met, I actually started discovering that my thing was photography and still photography. So I went to work by, I don't remember even more, getting together in a newspaper, a student's newspaper called O Metropolitano, that was directed by Cacá Diegues. At that time, he was a young student of law in the Catholic University in Rio. And he put together a bunch of friends that came to work with him. Arnaldo Jabor, which after I worked as a DP in his first documentary. Helena Solberg, maybe a first feminist, you probably know about her. Davi Neves, a great director there. And, and other people, Then I went there and started work as a still photographer. But at that time, 1959, Juscelino Kubitschek had found Brasilia, and Brasilia was open as the capital of the country. And there are lots of beautiful things happen in Brazil. And between them, the Museum of Modern Art. And the Museum of Modern Art, they start a series of presentations of foreign filmmaking, American filmmaking, French filmmaking. So we all start meeting each other and loving cinema, going to these screenings and stuff like that. And this creates a bond between us. So just to you to understand, Carlos Diegues, Cacá Diegues, to whom I work later on as a DP, I was the production manager of his first shot. Davi Neves was shooting. A production manager there was having sandwich made, to feed the crew, and bring Coca-Colas to everybody. And we shoot with Payar Bolex. That was how we start. Okay, later on, I'm going to be brief and go straight. around 1964, I was in the bar. You mentioned that Paulo Gil met Thomas Farkas in the bar in Copacabana. I was in the bar in Ipanema and talking to Rui Guerra, and I mentioned Ricardo Aronovich. I have seen last night this film. He said, "Oh, yeah, you want to work with him?" I said, "Sure. Pick him up in the airport." So I work in Os Fuzis, the guns, whatever you translate, Os Fuzis, as a camera assistant for Ricardo. And we stay 6 months shooting Os Fuzis in Milagres. And, I learned everything that I could learn. Ricardo was an incredible man, very generous, incredible maestro, and very generous to teach me. And I would study cinematography very seriously. So we create a bond, like of knowledge and discuss that we have up to today. Now, coincidentally, Glauber Rocha was shooting Deus e Diabo na Terra do Sol, which Paulo Gil Soares was his first assistant. A brilliant man, journalist, I believe, always by soul or research and stuff like that. And they come, Glauber and Paulo Gil came, from Bahia, from the north, and went through Milagres, where we're shooting Os Fuzis, and came to visit, because many people went there to visit a film crew, Cinema Novo. We were doing, we are pioneer of a generation, of course. And so we create a little bond. We met each other, like I did with the other filmmakers all over the world later on, It's like it's a family, film around the world. You create bond. You admire each other. We love each other. We live, connect with each other like we're doing now, And then, first of all, I thank you for inviting me to this program, and I congratulate everybody that's involved in assisting it. Well, so later on, I've shot, that's one thing I was talking to William that I would like to correct. I shot O Circo de Arnaldo Jabor before. It was a documentary about the decadence of, the circles, in towns, because in the rise of television, color television, right, coming, and people were not paying attention to these things. It's a beautiful movie. We got lots of prizes because of that. But then Thomas Farkas started this production endeavor. He was an important man for Brazilian documentary and for Brazilian filmmaker, because lots of people, went to shoot little documentaries or important documentaries, and most of important everything like that. Thomas Farkas was based in São Paulo, like you are right now. And we have an important university there, lots of social scientists. And these films that he have done always had a contribution by political scientists and social scientists, historical scientists, so they're based very much in not only in realism, but also about social history, right? In based on science, not or just opinion, right? Or even art, because Cangaço was known in Brazil before films and got prizes around the world. Other films are important. But nobody ever understood what Cangaço was, and it was something incredible, like a small revolutionary activities based in intuition and or justice, natural justice, because things are wrong, things are not the law wouldn't apply to everybody, exploitation, people's exploitation basically and moreover at the northeast of Brazil. Why northeast of Brazil? Because the northeast of Brazil is a very special region in Brazil. Brazil is a huge thing. There's the Amazons, there are the Indians, there's the South, there are Italian people, Japanese people who came to migrate in São Paulo, Italians in the South. Well, but the Northeast is when Portuguese discover, and start, trying to produce things in Brazil, and the Indians offer resistance. First, they kill them all. First, horrible things to be laughing about, but that's like a joke. And then they brought slavers, right? And but also the Brazil having an incredible coast. The Dutch, they took over the northeast of Brazil and they stayed there, I think, from 1850, or I don't remember that stuff. Really the dates. But for 50 years, the Dutch took over Recife and stuff like that. So there is an incredible mixture, lots of Jewish, escaping from, European Inquisition came to the Northeast. So the Northeast has an incredible culture, an incredible melting point, cultural melting point, and make its culture very interesting, very complex, very rich, very pleasant sometimes, and very painful, because there are lots of wars, lots of local insurgents that if you know other documentaries about that. Well, but, coming by that, so I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I met Paulo Gil in this visit, and I started being a kind of modern, very prepared cinematographer, young cinematographer at that moment. And I had the aval of Thomas Farkas that gave us everything that we want at that time to produce these films, right?
Wow.
We call Caravana Farkas, Farkas Caravan, which is a series, like you said, I think 20 or 30 very important documentaries. And we formed lots of DPs there. Lauris Corel, which is my assistant, he's a very important director of photography, friend of mine since the beginning. Pedro Farkas, which is Thomas' son, one of the Thomas' sons. Pedro was born when we started doing it, or he was really little, and but he became one of the best, director of photography in Brazilian cinema. But anyway, I don't know if you want to stop here. If I answer the question.
Let me stop you because I'm curious. You're mentioning some very important names in Brazilian cinematography, and also talking about this very early period. And I wanted to ask about your influences in cinematography, because while you've mentioned Ricardo Aranovic, it's impossible to deny that the late 50s and the early 60s was one of the greatest times for cinematography, perhaps in the history of Brazilian cinema. And certain names do stand out. Helio Silva, Mário Carneiro, Tony Rapattoni, José Rosa, Fernando Duarte,
which just passed away,
Just passed away.
Yeah.
And Jib Lutfi. And, there's this kind of boom of cinematography. And I'm curious if you were looking to these figures as someone starting out to develop your own style, if they were perhaps influencing you in any way, or perhaps other places were a greater factor in contributing to how you would develop as an artist and cinematographer.
Okay, look, what happened there in cinematography happens up to today, cinematography, and I teach cinematography, and I did reflect a lot about, not only about my career, but the cinematography by itself. As cinematography has a paradox, which is an integration at the same time. Art and science comes in parallel with it. You need to know arts, you know what's going on, history of art, history of photography, history of cinematography, history of film, and at the same time, you need to know technology, because it's a very complex technology. And film, I mean, what you call organic sensitive materials, like negative film, had a big science behind it. And lots of people didn't know about that. It was like you put your spot meter and your meter, and you expose, you send to process, and you think, oh, it came out good. The industrial process would guarantee you that things would come up if you expose well. Well, but behind that, there's a science called sensitometry. At the time, I was the only one who went deep into that. And guess what? Ricardo Aranovich knew about that. And, I think the most important cinematographers up to today, they know these things, what's inside the camera, what you can do in the process to change things and express yourself. Or express, because I don't think it's about to express yourself, but to serve the script or whatever you're doing, right? So that's how my career was based. Was first, that I with Ricardo, which was already a great cinematographer, recognized before he was recognized in Europe. I mean, he was a very important cinematographer in Argentina. He's 10 years older than myself, and he was already known in Argentina. And when I saw his stuff, and that's my conversation with Rui Guerra, I said, Rui, I saw this Argentina retrospective, and I saw these two movies. They look so much different from each other, and they're done by the same guy. So there's no style here. And that's one of these things that we need to talk about. Cinematography is not style. I never want to develop my style. I don't have a style. What I have is design. It's a way to serve the script and the vision of my director. Okay? And there's nothing wrong about that. The best cinematographer of the world, the movies don't look like each other. After, if you know about film history, my second great master was Giuseppe Rotunno, Pepe Rotunno. And you see Ricardo's or Pepe Rotunno's cinematography, you don't see one movie looking like each other. So there's no style. It's like the cinematography design is anti-style. Mm-hmm. There's no beauty. There is proper. It's something proper for that movie, you do it. So what's important meeting Ricardo, because first of all, intuitively, I saw that on his work. And then I had the privilege to stay with him for 6 months, live in the same house with his family, his 2 small daughters that came, and his wife. Wow. We live like a family, in the house in Milan for 6 months, because there was no money, there was no negative. The film would stop every week, but with an incredible crew, incredible actors, it was fantastic. It was like living a big university. Well, that's like the base I work with. Mm-hmm. So what I'm trying to tell you, my expression that I came later on was based in knowledge, studying fine arts, knowing the artistic side of it. At the same time, I always had, I'm not a nerd, to tell you the truth as a joke, I hate equipment but I'm in love with the image, and I do everything to know how you make an image better. So you need to know about equipment technology, and that's what happened at that time. At that time, everybody say, "Oh, don't work with Afonso because he's like a technologist." They would say to me, but great directors start working with me, and things happen to do well. It was good marriages, like we say, and we did great things together.
I want to follow up on what you're saying about never fully adapting a kind of style, because especially thinking about this early period of your career, and if we talk about your first two works, O Cerco and Mémoria do Cangaço, there is an enormous stylistic difference between these two films. And in O Cerco, while you're employing an array of handheld shots and handheld cinematography, we move over to Mémoria do Cangaço, and it does feel like almost it's a different cinematographer behind the camera as far as style. You see now a static camera, tracking shots. While there is handheld cinematography certainly employed in this film, it does seem like the approach was taken differently. And I'm wondering if you perhaps have any memories of conversations between you and Paulo Soares, or you and Tomás Farkas, about what the style of this film should be like. Because it's striking. Paulo Gil just finished working on Deus e Diabo, which is visually an incredibly radical
It's
film.
an incredible movie, yeah.
And then you come here, and this film is a little bit more conservative in what happens with the camera. So
Yeah.
Perhaps you remember what those conversations were like between you and the director, or you and the producer
Well,
for this film.
You see, I mean, if you saw, if you have the movie and everybody's seen it, I hope, it was based in incredible research and also an incredible production for a documentary. So you see, Paulo Gil was the first guy who got the hands on that material. You know about the material that was shot by a salesperson that worked together with Cangaceiros, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that was the first time that the material was revealed to the public. You know the story of this material?
Yes.
Have you heard?
Yes, but you're welcome to.
Okay, so what happened is there is this guy who was I don't know how you say in English, but it's a salesperson who was in Recife and was in Salvador, Bahia, and he would get things, buy things, and go inside the country and sell. He was a salesman, but for things that wasn't available inside, I don't know. It wasn't plastic because plastic didn't exist at that time. Shoes and hats or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
He was crazy about film, and he got a camera, a film camera, 35 millimeters, and he took the camera for the interior, and he started shooting stuff. And suddenly he met, Lampião, which is the most famous cangaceiro and the biggest band, at that time. And they didn't know what's going on. And they felt, look, I'm taking pictures of you. And they said, fantastic, take the pictures you want. They didn't know what it meant, the cangaceiros, or he didn't know what he was doing at the time, just doing it as a great artist. So what happened is when the evolution, of course, the army and the police, the state police was around these people, trying to get them, trying to kill them. And by intelligence, one day they found that this guy was going back and forth, and they arrested him. We don't know very much what happened exactly to this guy, but they got all his materials, all the materials filmed, which are not processed yet. Look at that. And they left it. They put it into a police station in Recife, a northeast capital. And that stuff stayed there for, I don't know, 30 years, 40 years. I don't have historical, I'm sorry about that. I'm
No,
not
that's
a
okay.
historian by
That's
memory.
okay.
But anyway, later on, somebody found that stuff and say, oh my God. And people, it was lucky that the police didn't open the cans, right? It's, oh, get rid of that stuff, gave us, somebody picked that stuff. And careful, they process it there. And there is like an historical monument right there of these people. I mean, the life of them.
Right.
And
Can you recollect the first time you saw that footage?
no, it was incredible. It was Thomas Farkas. We actually, I don't remember how was the property and how he was involved into the recuperation of this material. I don't believe it was him who processed it, but I know it was him who got the rights for it. So we start the whole thing with that. So, and then now there is this research and the intelligence and production to get connected to the characters of these things. So, of course, we didn't meet these guys because they're all dead, right? And later on, there's one of the most incredible things that I shot in my life was the heads of these people in the museum. That was like a scandal. Later on, everybody said, what's going on here? How come you have heads of people? They're real people inside glasses. I mean, this like this movie actually was the document who exposed that absurd, right? I mean, and this wasn't fun. The photograph that you have, like for the movie that I'm shooting with that thing, that's the dolly that we did with those things in the museum in Salvador. Well, anyway, so you see the level of research that Paulo Gil and the production had done to get that. Well, the other thing that happened in this movie is to the interview of this colonel, which is the main, killer, Cangaço killer. And the guy was alive there, and he said everything that we asked him, and everything was fine for him. Because he was a policeman, and he became new about, and he was doing the law, because these guys were out of, these things, sociological, they are very interesting, and very interesting to study. I mean, perhaps we get into Cangaço itself, but we're talking about the movie. But the most extraordinary thing is when we got to Dada's house. Dada was alive,
right?
And somebody shot her leg, and she didn't have a leg, and she was wearing crutches. So we begged in her house without any permission to shoot her, But Paulo Gil said, and I had the sound person near me, he said, Paulo Gil said, Afonso, whatever happens, don't stop the camera. Well, I'm telling you, I had in the Northeast, I had perhaps twice or three times my life being threatened because I was with the camera shooting. It's not the big stuff, but it happens with cinematography. You get shot because you point the camera, right? So we didn't know what's going to happen because they could be armed there. So we opened the door, and you see, and she was so brave, this woman. It's with one hand she supported herself in the table, and she got to the crotch and she throws on the camera. And you see that, so wait, it's not what you're thinking about. And then we have a talk to her, and we became friends. But I mean, there was the level, of she didn't know that we were going there. You know,
Wow.
it's like a newsreel today that you interview and you just come to somebody and ask, are you okay? Are you committing a crime? Whatever. Have you done
Right.
that? No, that was a kind of journalism, but not very well produced at the time. You know, everybody there had a little risk because, you know, I mean, things were very crazy, you know, at that time. Everything here also you got to know that we're in the middle of the dictatorship. The military dictatorship was already 3 years into it. And like the first film we did, the Circo, it was another project that was going to be shot in Recife, in between favelas near the sea, you know, palafitas. And we could have done because things had happened there. Other crews have been arrested there. This time we are very sparse and nobody knew what we were doing. It was like a scientific research and everything was fine. And military and intelligence control of the police wasn't that first, like it became after when the guerrillas started operating and the torture started much later, right? 68, 71, and stuff like that. So
Hmm.
this is a time that there was no, let's say, police overseeing us or watching what we were doing, right? I mean, and it wasn't anything, let's say, foresee revolutionary, but scientifically important, historically important, right? Well, about the design and the graphic, I'm sorry because I told you I talk a lot. I speak like.
No, no, it's great. I have a million of follow-ups, but please continue.
Okay, so we had a design, really. You know what I mean? We had a design. We had moments that we should say, look, let's do this handheld because this and that. And like, let you see when we interview the colonel, the policeman, it's everything on the tripod. The guy was cold. And then, you know, you have my framing because it's already my contribution from painting. You know, I mean, I had already been, you know, exposed to painting, framing, and history of film and stuff like that. Then it's something natural that comes with you as an artist that you apply, you
Yeah.
know, intuitively. Today, you know, I know how things are doing. Actually, I'm writing, teaching these things, you know, in an analytical and a critical thinking kind of procedures, you know.
I wanted to, there's so many amazing points about the film that you've touched on, and I think to first follow up, you've mentioned the experience of meeting, some of the most famous Cangaceiro figures of all time, including policeman Zé Rufino and those four
Delfim,
people.
Coronel
And I'm
Delfim.
and I'm curious if you can talk about your experience actually putting these people in front of the camera, because of course you mentioned that crazy scene with Dada, which is shocking still today to see. Um,
Yeah,
but there's also figures such as Zé Rufino, Saracura, Angelo Roque, and Ottila, where there's seemingly a more intimate and less hectic relationship with the camera. And I'm curious if you went there before you began filming and explained to them how it was going to work, and
no,
how exactly did those scenes coming about, because there's of course a certain beauty and there's a kind of staging. Of course,
yeah,
when Zehufino first comes in, he's walking from the
yeah,
distance, and he walks up and
yeah,
everyone tips their hat to him. In addition to him, a similar thing happens with Sarakura. He's walking to work, he's walking to his job, we see him in his natural setting, and then he sits down in front of your camera. So how exactly did that work and that function?
That's
And did these
that's
people?
that's Paulo Gil. Okay, Paulo Gil was a very intelligent man, you know, and And his story, it's incredible, because we became real friends. But the fact that that time I immigrated to United States, in the 70s,
Hmm.
I kind of went apart of many of my friends and stuff like that. But I keep coming back. And the Paulo Gil, he was so intelligent and as a great journalist. He started doing journalism for TV Globo, and he became one of main directors of TV Globo in the end of his career. And he had a very, not tragic, but sad death, which I was far away, but up to today, I feel really bad for what happened to him and his family. And but he was very prepared intellectually and artistically. He came to be Glauber Rocha assistant, so he
Hmm.
saw the creativity of Glauber Rocha. Glauber directing. So you got it together, and you understood very much these things, like the mise en scène of the personage, the characters into a documentary, right? So this documentary has this style, but it's a feature film style. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
Introduction. It was just not a talking heads kind of movie. There's action,
No.
there is materials, there's editing, there's music, and there's so this is Paulo Gil, right? And we did, but again, I believe production, Paulo Gil went ahead a couple of times and had a little talk before we shot. But most of the time, because money, the time that we had, it wasn't prepared. Anything wasn't pretty much prepared. Like we had the day to do these things. We had perhaps 2 days to do something. But there was never like a stage, like we staged something. It was done at the day, whatever is around, and wow, there is a panoramic of this guy arrive and go to the fields and stuff like that. But never like a prep design, No, everything done, artistically, intuitively.
I wanted to. Well, you brought up the footage shot by Benjamin Abraão Boto
É Benjamin
that
Abrão,
that is used in this film, and I understand that Mémoria do Cangaço was was a film that had a kind of distribution, and because of that, was in fact one of the first times that many people had the opportunity to maybe see this footage. And I also am aware that this was a time period where a lot of people were arguing about what Brazilian cinema should be. Should it be an art form that pushes away the masses, or should it be an art form that the masses can accept and watch in an easy way? And with those two things in mind, that footage and the shock around it, the shock around the scenes that you're filming with Dada and the cangaceiros, as you mentioned, the heads. I'm curious if you have any recollections about how this film was received, and what the reception is like. And
Well,
beyond
I
that, I'm curious if you could talk about whether or not any of the cangaceiros got to see the film, and maybe what they thought about it, if they did.
that I don't remember the Cangaceiro seeing the movie, but I remember the festival, Rio Film Festival, when this film was exhibited. Joaquim Pedro de Andrade and some other filmmakers were arrested because they spit into a general, which is the head of Militar Junta. Do you know
Wow.
about that?
No.
So perhaps 15 days before the film was open in the Rio Film Festival at the time, I remember this very vivid. There was like, because the military, I mean, these things were not today that you have bodyguards around and stuff like that protect you. People would walk out, the generals would all walk out of the cars and go into something. And there was some kind of thing that the military was going to do in Hotel Gloria in Rio. I don't know if you know, it's a beautiful hotel. And the guy went, there was many, some filmmakers and some intellectuals that they are, and this general went through them and they spit on the guy. And they were all arrested on the spot. And between them, not Glauber, I don't remember Glauber, but Joaquim Pedro de Andrade and what's his name? The guy who I did, oh my God, Gustavo Dal was there. Mm-hmm. Mário Carneiro, the photographer, because they are some reason they are together. They knew, they went there and they spit on the guy, literally. Something that. But you got to have a historical reduction there. Things were not. I'm not saying not that bad, but that horrible, like how it became later with torture and people killing each other and. Well, they are arrested, but they're put in jail. In the festival, we wrote a document, everybody, because there are people from international delegations, stuff like that, in the festival. We wrote a document asking them to be free. So that I remember, the repercussion and the fact that the film got the best prize, the best documentary, and I got, I think I got the prize of photography, the cinematography at the same time. But look at that. What you ask me, that's a discussion how cinema novo, cinema brasileiro should be. And this is a great question, because that's not the origin of cinema novo, but it's when cinema novo start to be known with this name, because what cinema novo is a modernist movement. What it means, modern, by modern, you understand, is like a break of something that was established and something that's so new that's recognized as a modern, right? Photography was something modern. The Impressionist painting is modern. What is modern art? It's the breaking what the tradition of painting, probably caused by photography, right? I mean, mm-hmm. You don't need to copy anymore. We have cameras here. Well, so Cinema Novo starts really with Nelson Pereira dos Santos, which is a guy who saw all these tries of industry in São Paulo, in Rio, people building up studios and making films like Hollywood or Italy, like in the, what you call Veracruz and Cinédia in Rio, Atlântida in Rio. There are studios with lights and cameras and foreign cameramen and stuff like that. There are lots of money in São Paulo. Always have been lots of money in Brazil and people who want to have expression, their country to have expression. So Nelson broke, and the break of Cinema Novo first is we're not doing in the industrial way. We're doing in the individual way, into an independent way. So production by production, not company related and stuff like that. We ask money for the banks, or we have, these people who protects you, and then mecenas, right? I mean, and it starts like that. But what happened after Nelson Pereira, and he introduced that in a whole movement to understand filmmaking, given by the Cinemateca of Rio, the Museum of Modern Art, is that we're a mixture of social realism of Italian cinema, who has to do with our political and social reality at the time. And Nouvelle Vague, because we, at the same time that we are seeing all this stuff, there is a very active Alliance Française, in Rio, which is one cultural branch of French government, who brought us. I mean, we saw, weeks after being released in Paris, we saw all the shorts of all the French French directors, Ascenseur pour le Chauffeur, Nuit Brouillard. We saw the shorts. I mean, the Rio was an incredible cultural evolution there. And Brazil was like that, 59. We see it. And then we had the presence of Jean Rouch. Jean Rouch went there. What else went there? I forgot. The guy who created the Institute of Filmology in Paris. Not only Jean Rouch. There's Pierre Casse. Later on, I did a television series with Pierre Casse, which became my friend,
Right.
And he was a great, Cahiers de Cinéma, critic.
Yes.
Right?
He would direct some films in Brazil.
Yeah, he directed a film where he directed this series that I shot called Carnet Brésilien, which it took me like 10 years to see what I was doing, because they would take the negative out to Paris and we never saw, because that time we couldn't see it, And what else? I mean, so we had this bond, It took us some time to be recognized, but then I think the phenomenon of recognition of Brazilian cinema, it was Glauber with Antônio das Mortes in Cannes. And that was very important for my career. There's no doubt about that. And that's really the spring that gave me the privilege to meet other people all over the world was Antônio das Mortes.
And to your memory, Mémoria do Cangaço never had any issues with censorship or the release or nothing like that. Was it a film that was widely released? Was this film being shown?
To tell you the truth, William, I don't remember about that. Because you know what? I was shooting like hell. I was always in the boondocks, I wasn't in Rio for that time. But was very well received, like was the circus, stuff like that. But look, it was very well received. It wasn't in television. It wasn't probably in private, for privileged people in Rio, São Paulo, Rio Grande do Sul, screenings. Brazilian cinema was not shown in 1964. It became really start being shown after Deus o Diabo, who probably is the same time. That was a fantastic thing. That I remember, wow, what is this, And somehow Paulo Gil comes on this wave, surfing this wave.
Right.
Being work with Glauber and Rui Guerra. Rui Guerra had done Os Cafajestes and then did Os Fuzis. These movies were kind of, but only for the bourgeoisie, only for privileged people from the South Zona or in Rio, or, Brazilian cinema because to be discussed later on, But there is an incredible amount of production. People, there is a group of people who want to do it and found ways to produce it, which is very important. Producers, Barreto, Zelito, Thomas Farkas, and many others that sold their apartments, sold their houses, to put money in movies and never saw this money again.
Right.
Because it wasn't profitable at the time. Perhaps today, you can live out of it, but not at that time. You got to be rich, or you got to have your finance together.
Right.
Right.
I want to ask you about the Northeast and the Cangaceiro, because before this film, if you think about the Cangaceiro in Brazilian cinema, we know of very famous productions in the 50s and the 60s, a sort of cycle of films that came out about the cangaceiros, among which are O Cangaceiro by Lima Barreto, A Morte Comanda, O Cangaço, and Lampião, O Rei do Cangaço by Carlos Coimbra, and other films that were playing to big audiences. And these films, many historians have noted, have many factual inaccuracies and sort of mythologize the Cangaço figure in a way that isn't exactly true to reality. And it does seem that your film is an attempt to bring the Cangaço and these figures back to reality. And we were talking a little bit before we began here about also the way the Northeast had been depicted. We know that the Northeast was often not depicted in the Northeast, but it was depicted on a film set in Sao Paulo or Rio de Janeiro. And when we were talking, we mentioned the film, a film by Vladimir Carvalho that was banned because it went to the Northeast and it depicted truthfully the hardships that people were going through. And I'm curious, first of all, if you and Paulo Gil were familiar with this kind of history of Cangaço cinema and the myths that they were created, and if you were indeed attempting to demystify this space, and whether there were stakes at that, whether you were...
Yeah, that's a very good point to bring. Because what's happened right there? Let's see, in the very superficial way, how Cangaço happened, right?
Right.
How Cangaço happened. Look, I'm not a historian or a social, but, I know enough maybe to have my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
But what do you know now? What happened is there's these farms, huge farms, mainly cattle farms in the Northeast, or, whatever, plantations, sugar cane and shit with slaves and stuff like that. Like you had in Colombia, farmers had their paramilitary army, right?
Mm-hmm.
These farmers had bands, they got guys who can shoot, who can kill, and they have their reigns, like some tribes or something, but they're very powerful latifundiaries, like people who own an incredible amount of land and stuff like that. And they would do whatever they want. They exploit people like hell, people live in shanty houses and stuff like that. Well, these guys starting putting money in these paramilitary bands. So the paramilitary guys, and with a bit more experience, said, well, if we have the weapons, we have the army, we also have the power. And then what happened to start? They start getting into the Robin Hood syndrome, right? Take the rich and give to the poor, and let's go, because they love not the jungle, because there's no jungle there like Caatinga, they go to the boondocks. And if you travel inside Brazil and you go west from Bahia, it's amazing. Up to today, you run miles and miles and you don't see a soul life. It's a huge territory. The Northeast is probably a little, maybe half or 1/3 of the Amazon. But it's a huge area, which there's, very poor, agriculturally poor, you don't have anything. But there was huge farms and stuff like that. So these guys, they take over. And I don't know if you're familiar with a phenomenon a historical phenomenon called the, oh my God, it's a lieutenantism. It's young Arabs, young Turks, jovens turcos, young Turks. It's a movement of a military movement, which is kind of revolutionary. At this time, in the 30s, in Brazil, there was something, 18 do Forte, which the military had an insurrection against the army itself. Lieutenants, captains, they rebel in Copacabana Beach, and they walk out of Copacabana Fortress. Okay, and one of them is Prestes, is the guy who founded the Brazilian Communist Party later. And another one, Brigadeiro Eduardo Prestes, was a brigadier. That's the most right-winger guy in the country. Okay, so look at that. This is insurrection. And in the 60s, the cangaceiros in the 50s, aesthetically, this is an insurrection, okay? So this could be good because people are pissed with what's going on socially and politically, right?
Mm-hmm. Right.
You know what I mean? So, but what happened is there was a constitution, there was a code of law, and these guys are outlaws. They do whatever they want, and they also kill people, without justice, anything like that. I mean, so there is the aesthetic and the glamour and how they're dressed and how brave they were with the letter codes, go over, and make libertarian stuff, make justice for on their hands. But man, I mean, so this identification, so for a long time, the cangaceiros could be like a synonyms of guerrilla, if the guerrilla is something that could be, doing
Right.
justice.
Right.
But what happened now in Brazil? You know what I'm saying? There's a bunch of people who have weapons for drug traffics and create militia. You're doing the same, man. Do you like them? Do you approve? So now, that's the whole thing, I mean, we got to have historical reflection, They
Right.
call it scientific historical reduction, right? I mean, you got to understand what that was at that time, because after is not the same thing, because history changes, culture changes, everything changes, morality, ethics change, right? I mean, we have today a conscience of something that's very different than we had 50 years, 80 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, there is this beautiful thing, and I think Paulo Gil in this film want to look into that. And I think it was the first film that kind of reflects about that. I don't know if you're familiar, I don't want to talk about myself, but later on, Joaquim Pedro de Andrade did a movie called Brasília, Contradições de uma Cidade Nova. Have you heard
Right.
about this movie?
I've seen it. It's beautiful.
Yeah, I shot with Joaquim.
Right.
And what I
Right.
shot, what it was the movie, was a criticism about this city, in which is everything so beautiful, but there is no place to the people that build the city to live. You know what I mean? So, I mean, these documentaries, the tradition of the Brazilian documentaries this time, they are very critical, very severe. And Joaquim, man, I mean, Mémoria and Dr. Lúcio Costa were peace with him, because you don't want to hear the truth, you
Right.
don't want to be criticized by your friends. But that's what's happening, and that's what's happening with Cangaço also, and everybody's putting together. And you see that later on, Glauber, Antônio das Mortes is also totally critical of that, because it's also about the Cangaço, but was much more about the whole political situation. But you see the Cangaço dying, other, and the guy, Antônio das Mortes, is actually Coronel Rufino. You know what I'm saying? I mean, all these things were kind of, in Cinema Novo, they are kind of together, and they're one single. And of course, Antônio das Mortes is a totally metaphoric film, because then was done, 67, in which things were really getting heavy, in terms of living in Brazil under dictatorship, right? So it's a different language also. But anyway,
to what extent would you say that? Well, I know this film is made during or right after the dictatorship, and the new image of Brazil being promoted globally is an image of beauty, of people that are not starving on the streets of Rio de Janeiro, of Copacabana. And to what extent would the dictatorship feel threatened by you going to the Northeast and showing images of maybe a real Brazil? And could that be for you and Paulo Gil and of course Glauber and Hoiguera and these filmmakers, a kind of ways, a kind of means of perhaps fighting back against that image, but also perhaps the reason why we can say that there were clashes between the dictatorship and this type of cinema that you're referring to, the films by Joaquim Pedro, Glauber, Hoiguera, and Mémoria do Cangaço, where the beautiful Brazil that we're seeing in the magazines is no longer that version being shown on the big screen. Would you say that that's an accurate assessment of the kind of tension?
It's an accurate assessment, yes, because one of the things that the dictatorship started right away was getting a propaganda thing. I don't know if you know about Jamazon films.
No.
It's a set of films that was made.
I do.
And put by TV Globo, because at that time, they bought everything, and things were completely different. TV Globo had relationship with the worst there is in the United States, and it was Time Life at that time, and
he made films with the title "Beautiful Brazil." Or
it's a beautiful Brazil.
The Wonders of...
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, so I mean, Cinema Novo was, the opposite of that. That's what it's called. It's social realism.
Right.
And you have Cinco Vezes Favela, and Nelson Pereira dos Santos, Rio Zona Sul, Rio Zona Norte, Rio 40 Graus, these movies are about the real Rio de Janeiro. One of the most known movies in the world for quite a while was Black Orpheus, which is a French movie. And you see Rio, and you see Brazil, and the samba, and there are ghosts, and the candomblé, whatever. But the image that the foreigners are for Rio, it's based on that, and that's beauty, color, everything. And Jamazon is that, always blue sky, and TV Globo for a while it also was, everything is fine, everything is beautiful. Look at the nuclear reactors, the huge dams, and things that we're doing. And man, what is behind that up to the corruption like hell, silence the press to steal money, That's what the dictatorships are, man. It's control, personal control, for a group of people. As a matter of fact, these are the real Cangaço at the time, They're the real cangaceiros, at the time, you know. But
So I have
anyway,
no, please.
no, that's why I'm saying aesthetically, you're
Right.
absolutely right. The cinema novo became the antithesis of how beautiful Brazil were. It wasn't any beautiful, and everything got worse and worse until the point that the military say, "Well, we can't handle this anymore. Get it, open the." And the democracy came back, and that's happening.
I have two more questions for you here, and I really want to thank you for the hour and 15 minutes up until now of your time that you've given us, you've given me,
No, my
and given us
pleasure,
to
my
talk about this
honor. I
film.
love this. Don't worry about it. Thank you so much. Thank you.
So this next question, I mean, you've spoken about Paulo Gil quite a bit, and you've spoken about the research process behind this film, and I know it is asking you to think back to 1964, but I'm curious if you can maybe actually give us a sense of what a Paulo Gil Soares research process would be like, and whether before you began shooting, he shared with you texts, photos,
Oh,
information. How did he prepare for this film? Because
no,
as you
no.
mentioned, it's intense. The background
No,
research into this.
to tell you the truth, I mean, maybe with the family, the Farkas family, who you said you have contact with?
Guilherme Farkas, the sound
Kiko,
designer and the grandson of.
Kiko. His nickname is Kiko Farkas. His second child. Yeah, he's a beautiful guy. And Pedro, you can talk to Pedro
Right,
also, because he's also a wonderful guy.
right.
But perhaps you have more information about the research itself that was done
No,
at the time. Because, like I told you, I was a very kind of busy guy shooting things all the time
sure.
and stuff like that. But I mean, I live in São Paulo in Farca's house for a long time in these preparations and stuff like that. We really talk about all these things because we are very intense politically, intellectually, into preparation. I don't recall who he was working with, but it's not only from his head. Perhaps in the credits of the movie, do you have any thanks for people there?
Thanks to the professor who's interviewed, thanks to the Bahia police
Yeah,
and
exactly. Yeah,
things of that
exactly.
nature.
But there was a huge research done. Like I told you,
Right.
Paulo Gil Soares was a journalist. He was
Hmm.
a newsman, you know. Uh, and they are very prepared, they're very important. But again, I mean, we had a very fertile scientific, social, scientific community in São Paulo, University of São Paulo, USP, USP, right? I mean, and everybody was like very in contact to each other, to things. And Farkas, Thomas Farkas was, like a magnet
Hmm.
what getting people in his house. We stay in his house, me, Lauro, and the film crews already. Before we go, we stay like sometimes 1 week preparing stuff. And I remember he receiving all kinds of people and artists and stuff, you know. And he was very generous. Thomas will never say, "Don't do this, don't do that." He always gave the resource for us, Geraldo Sarno, Sérgio Muniz. They're like the main directors that
Right.
work with him, in Caravana Farcas. I shot lots of films with Geraldo Sarno,
Right.
but much more ethnographic movies
Yes.
than social. Although Geraldo has more political, intense films done before and after.
Yes.
But there's Viva Cariri, Casa de Farinha, all these movies. They are very beautiful and they're very important for a moment in that life, in that culture, for these people, for Brazil, and, record that, There is, I don't know if you know o povo, Sérgio Muniz, O Povo do Velho Pedro. Have you seen this movie?
So the thing about this film is that I don't believe there's an available digital copy because
I don't think you know. Do you have
been
contact?
eager.
Do you have contact with Sérgio Muniz?
Yes, we actually interviewed him about Viramundo because he was the only remaining person alive from the set of that film. And,
yeah, because that movie I think is very important also. His
Oh, yeah.
research about that community, it's unbelievable.
I agree.
It's unbelievable. And this phenomena of o Velho Pedro, these guys, it's unbelievable. I mean, things that happen in the Northeast, were very. There's another thing called the Elmiro Gouveia, that's from Geraldo Sarna, right about the first attempt of industrialization, Brazilian industrialization, and things around that. Well, that's our history.
Yeah. I have a final question, and it's an audience question, and it's two parts. Someone who wants to know, did Mémoria do Cangaço, which was shot in Bahia, inform in any way your work in Antônio das Mortes, which also was shot in Bahia? And that's the first thing they want to know. And then the second thing they ask is how your work with the Caravan Farkas impacted your work abroad with other established filmmakers, if at all. So a two-part question, one about Antônio das Mortes and whether this influenced it, and then how your work as a documentary filmmaker on all of those films informed any of your future work.
There's an anecdote there. Like when I did Os Fuzis, I stayed 6 months in Northeast without coming back to Rio. Like I lost my girlfriend, I we stayed, there was really having 64 to be there for 6 months without contact. There was no television, there was only radio, and there was no newspaper and stuff like that. It was like a prison. And I said to myself, I'm never going to be in this city my entire life. I shot 5 movies after there.
Oh, man.
That's sort of like your big mouth. Don't say anything because then I went there for Italian documentaries, and I shot Antônio das Mortes there. In the house that was the colonial house in Antônio das Mortes, that's where we stay in Os Fuzis. Me and Ricardo Aranovich, that's the house that we live there. Okay. The thing is, Antônio das Mortes is a really small production. If you don't know, it was shot in 20 days. We said, let's shoot this thing because there's some French money there. It's supposed to be a pilot for a French series, and Globe said, no, let's do a feature film here. Let's do it. And we shot in 21 days. I never saw a frame of the movie. But before, with conversation with Glauber, and we discussed the look of the film. And I dared to do something because I knew sensitometry, I knew how to work in the color processing, the look that I was going to do. And I dared to do something that could be a ruin of my career in the entire production.
What was that?
But what happened is that I tested before because I dared, but I wasn't crazy, I did it under control, like I push the processing of color film, which is very dangerous. Because when in the color film, you have 3 layers, RGB, like today in digital, you have RGB. But when you process the 3 layers, right, if one layer cross to another, it creates like a huge filter on top of it.
Right.
And you have what you call a dominance. So the movie at some point could become totally violent, and you can't get out of that anymore. So I did a series of tests, to push the movie, to push the negative to a point in which the primary colors would, the density of primary colors would become really alive. Because there is a myth in Brazil that the Northeast is like a desert, Sahara, there you don't have a cloud. It's the other way around. The Northeast is always cloud. You don't have, because the weather comes from the sea, and go over the Northeast, try to rain, but doesn't find any forest or anything, so it doesn't condense, but it's always cloud, and you say, oh, we're going to have this beautiful. Of course, you have beautiful, clear days and stuff like that. But so I said, because I was there before, because of the Caravana Facas, and I said, I'm going to force this thing, and I'm going to do something that's going to be, because it wasn't a realistic film. Talking to Glauber is a very stagey movie, like you see and stuff. It's a very strange movie, done with the force of the people there, people chanting and the things, and the guy shooting each other, And so we said, let's design these things. And Glauber, when we talk a lot, about these things, but it was very, for me, if I was today, I would do that because I would stress myself and had a heart attack. But at the time, I was young and say, let's do it. When I came back, I had a phone call from São Paulo lab and say, do you know, Afonso, we have a problem here. We cannot print your movie. Mm-hmm. So I said, wait a second. So I went to São Paulo and work with this guy with the print lights. We need to change the things there to print the film, But the copy that you see now, it was, what do you call that, redone, because the originals were burned in Paris. There was a flame. And I did some, what do you call that in English? Recuperation.
You restored?
Restoration, sorry.
Right.
I did a restoration in England with a very good guy from a positive film. So we did as much as we could. But the things that you see today, you see there's some German or French subtitles because everything was done from a print that we found in Cuba or something like that. Mm-hmm. It was a pity, but the originals were incredible, much beautiful than we see today. But what happened is, like you asked, Antônio das Mortes, if I work with important directors in the world, like Stephen Frears, Almodóvar, Jim McBride, and all the Brazilian important guys like Walter Salles and everybody, was because of those, because Antônio das Mortes.
Wow.
I had this joke. What's the name of the English director, Fernando? Oh my God, my head. Love in the Time of Color. Mm-hmm. I had an interview with him in London. I was there and he asked for interview me and said, in the bar, the directors, the London guy, they take you to this pub, the club, right? And you have a drink and stuff like that. And he said, oh, Afonso, when I was young, I saw this movie with this guy with the black thing with a weapon. Have you seen this movie? I told him, yes, I saw by the viewfinder.
Right.
Through the viewfinder. So he said, did you shoot that? Said, you hired. And that was Everybody is like that. So this movie was very important at that time for the Cinema Novo, and the American Cinema Novo had started also. At the same time, it was the time that I came here, you know. I came in the 70s. I meet Jim McBride, who was, Jim McBride is like you. He studied Portuguese in Sao Paulo.
Hmm.
He speaks Portuguese.
Wow.
He loves Brazilian cinema. He speaks Portuguese currently,
Wow.
and he was friend of everybody. And somehow I went to live in New York, very close to his house. Glauber gave me a letter. Go find Jim. I was very shy. One day, Jim wrote to me, in 70. He's seen a documentary that I shot and directed in Chile. And Gianni Amico, an Italian director, said this film was done by Affonso, a friend of mine. And we connect and we are friends for so many years now, 50
Wow.
years. But I don't know. But
So,
anyway,
Alfonso,
I don't know if I answer your question.
no, you did, and I think I want to ask a final question. And once again, um, thank you for your time, for sharing your stories about Mémoria do Cangaço and your other work produced by Tomás. Really, there are a few ways that we can learn more about these films today. If I'm not mistaken, you remain the only person actually alive that worked on the set of Mémoria do Cangaço, and it's just incredible to be able to hear you speak about the film and to be able to learn more about it from you. And so thank you again for your willingness to join us today and discuss it. And with that, I want to kind of end by sort of opening it up. I know you mentioned that Paulo Gil Soares died at a young age. I know that his career, he made one feature-length film that's beautiful, Proazas de Satana. I'm curious if perhaps I didn't ask a question here to maybe bring up a memory that you have of him, or maybe you have a final sharing thought that you can give about Paulo Gil regarding this film in particular, or anything else that we can kind of finish off with, in case I perhaps didn't ask the question to get you to talk about him in a certain way or this work in a certain way.
Yeah, no, but it's a right question. My memory from Paulo Gil. What happened is the 60s are very important to my career. It's the most important time for my career in Brazil, somehow, because I became more an international cinematographer, American cinematographer, and not that I haven't shots in Brazil, but I became expensive, complicated, and and also I went away. I mean, somehow, because I got into problems. In '69, everybody fled the country. Caetano, everybody, Chico Buarque, Caetano and Gil were arrested. I was the free. We are very friends. I mean, Paulo Gil and I, one day, I photographed Caetano and Gil with the hair done because they had been arrested. This is 68, 69, and they left the prison. I was the first guy who photographed them after left prison. Everybody was going away from the country. Glauber. So at the end of 69, I moved to New York because some personal reasons. And I went to Europe. I met all these guys there. Congratulations. Well, I started my international career. So I went apart from many of my friends, and I would meet them. Not there was no internet at this time, and So we kind of separate to each other. And by chance, one day, while shooting, I don't know, commercials in São Paulo, I met Paulo Gil at the airport in the Ponte Aérea. So we flew from São Paulo to Rio together.
Wow.
And putting, the ideas together and the lives together and stuff like it was beautiful. But Paulo Gil, that was very formal guy like me, always with the jeans and not very formal, he was totally like well dressed and stuff like that. What's happened? He was the commercial director of TV Globo
Wow.
at that time because he's so intelligent. Paulo Gil is so intelligent, fascinating, storytellers and stuff like that, and competent, And what happened was really sad. This kind of innovation that they have in big corporation like TV Globe, somebody took over TV Globe and did like a administrative reform and fired Paulo Gil.
Mhm.
He's been 30 years like on the top of the television. And what happened is that he, like 15 days after, I think like that, he was found dead in his apartment alone. After 3 or 4, he had a heart attack and felt, and he died alone, in his apartment. But probably by sadness, by stress of these things. But it's very sad. He didn't deserve it. I mean, for me, it was like a tragedy. He wasn't. Nobody deserved these things. I'm not
Right.
putting names or nobody want to kill him. But he died like that. That's the real truth about that. That's what it was. I mean, Paulo Gil, from being a feature director, Proeza de Satanás, which I didn't participate, I wasn't in Brazil at the time, anything. He probably would have shot if I was there. But I didn't shoot Man Friends film because I was, away. And he changed totally his career. By I think there is some Walter Lima Jr. was doing. There was something very important in TV Globo. Profissão Repórter, no, it's another thing. It's Globo Repórter. I don't know. It was like before you had the journalist sides of TV Globo. They had this, not before cable, right? They had this important department there for documents. And Paulo Gil was the head of that for a while. And Walter Lima worked with him, also journalists, right? Perhaps Walter would know more about Paulo Gil change of his career, right? But basically what happened was that he became not a businessman, but a very influenced guy in TV Globo, which is very important, for it still are for Brazil,
Right.
It's an incredible corporation in news and entertainment producing house, right?
Right. Well, certainly Paulo Gil lives on in his cinematographic work, the films he directed. Of course, you had participated in so many of those films. So, especially the documentary films as part of the Caravana Farkas. And so your memories working on those and your memories of him are priceless, really. So once again, I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for sharing your time and your memories. And this is an incredible film. We're so happy to have an English translation of it, and I hope we can have you back to discuss the numerous other things you've worked on, because man, what a career in Brazilian cinema and in international cinema, and so many of the of your early works, I believe could really deserve a proper restoration, and these works deserve more attention. So
No, and I thank you, William, and to know more about you and what you're doing with your friends there, because this is very important, to preserve the culture of a country which you love, and all the countries. I mean, I think restoration of filmmaking, it's so important as producing new movies.
right,
Because the preservation of history, I mean, even everywhere we preserve, there are so many sad things like the fire on the Cinematographer Brasileira, and the blindness of our state authorities not to understand how important is the preservation of what it was done before, right?
right,
And so you do something incredible. And I tell you, look, I have lots of contacts, in which if you need to, or be, pleased to help, in the ABC curso de cinema, we have like a virtual cine club also, in
sure.
which you can put it together, our
It'd be great.
efforts. Some that
I know Cavi Borges is a big part of
Javi
this.
Borges is an incredible guy, and we are together on many things. I mean, COVID and the new technology put us together wherever we are now, right? And open a new world for communication and for knowledge and stuff like that. And I'm for that, and the speed of light, we can be together any place we are right now. And our audiovisual things, they're so important, and there are new generations that don't understand. You don't believe, another day in the school, 3 people that work with me, young people from schools of filmmaking, I asked them, do you know who Nelson Pereira dos Santos is, or are, or where?
Mhm.
One told me, I heard about. It's very sad and very, I mean, we are losing our history. And if you don't preserve and if you don't teach, if you don't organize, it's going to go away, man, because TikTok, it's much better, right? People love
Right,
the small, things,
right.
very
I hope you're able
comfort.
to show those students Vida Seca, or How Tasty is My Little Frenchman, or
Yeah. And yeah,
any of those
oh,
films.
I think it's great because also this thing about crossing cultures, United States, English, Portuguese, French, African. You see, I mean, we haven't seen lots of incredible things like African cinema. Do you know Hernani
Yeah,
Hefner? Because this is another guy that's very important. Uh, for you, and
of
he
course.
knows everybody and everything. He's very respectable, knowledge guy, So you're in good hands there.
Thank you. All right, Afonso, I'm going to end the live stream here. Thank you again. Thank you to ABC Cursos de Cinema. Thank you to Canal Thomas Farkas. And I'm looking forward to seeing you again in the future and to hearing more of your stories. I'm working on Brazilian films and international films. So thank you very much.
Just call. I will be here.
All right.
Take care. Thank you, Will.